features Notch wanted to add to Minecraft, but never did. And with mods, we've recreated all of these in game to see just how different Minecraft would feel if this had happened. Starting with Goblin Villages. Before there was Minecon, there was MinecraftCon, the first fan meetup back in 2010. And it was here that Notch talked about his plans for potentially adding in monster villages to the game. And in these villages, we'd find goblins even coming with a reputation system. And what's interesting to me is that while this never came to the game, we did get aspects of it. Reputation systems, the villagers have one, and neutral mobs to trade with, we'd eventually get those with piglins. Also having something like this, if you threw out a sword at a goblin, then they'd run around with said sword. Which, wouldn't you believe it, happens with our piglins too. But before we got piglins, we'd get zombified pigmen first, which fits the bill of something Notch talked about as prefix mobs. As mentioned on a stream back with Brocraft, Notch talked about the idea of having different mobs with elemental or material modifiers. So instead of just spiders, we'd have burning spiders, as well as giant zombies and cobblestone creepers. And while we did later get variants of all three of those mobs, cave spiders, charged creepers, and husks as well, we definitely never got anything with the word prefix used. And it seems like Mojang even made jokes about this after Notch's departure, since in the 3D Shareware April Fool's update, they had a text file hidden in the code that mentioned 11 new enemy variants, including the Buff Creeper and Evil Shroom 2, which Buff Creeper sounds like something I would have saved on my DeviantArt account, so I'm not hoping we get it added to the game. But before that idea of prefix mobs were even talked about, we had the idea for lava zombies. The original pitch before any other hostile mobs was that we would have lava zombies or troll infestations that roam the land. And while creepers and endermen are the only mobs that grief nowadays, back then the idea were that these trolls could walk around and break our blocks. And as far as infestation, we got the potion effect, and we also had zombie sieges that happened at villages at midnight. But there were still plenty of trolls to get added to Minecraft. Was 2010 after all. Before we ever got the campfires added to Minecraft, there was an idea for actual smoke blocks, which would generate above sources of fire, and you could walk through them, but they would cast shadows toward the ground before eventually floating upward and vanishing. And given just how much more intense the fire tick was back at this version of the game, I imagine a smoke block like this would have been pretty intensive to run. Basically the upward version of falling sand. So they left our skies clear instead, which unfortunately meant we also didn't get rainbows. Back on one of the old Ask Me Anything posts that Notch did on the Minecraft subreddit, a fan asked if Notch could hint at any feature that hadn't yet been publicly disclosed. And here we saw a mention about possibly adding square rainbows, which if they ever were added to the game, I think would have been a really fun feature to see after a rainstorm. Would have made getting through the rain a lot more bearable, but we never got anything like that added to our skybox. Nowadays, Mojang can't even come close to mentioning a feature without someone thinking that it's fully confirmed. And the truth is, that's always how it's been. Since even dating back to 2010, fans took a mention of whales as something that it was obvious that these were coming to the game. And to be fair, a lot of this is hearsay. So he might have been a lot more bullish on adding whales to the game than we know of. I mean, this is mentioned in a list with other features that we got, like trapdoors and wolves, but as evidenced by the distinct lack of blubber on your screen, there were no whales added to Minecraft. And nowadays, I doubt they would. Teaching a young generation of kids about the joys of whaling probably isn't high on their to-do list. If we ever get one, it'd likely be more mythical, so then we're allowed to kill it. And that's the same reason why we haven't seen sharks added to the game either. Back when Notch was toying with the idea of sea monsters, he did note that there was a possibility of getting sharks added to the game. Though if we look at the ever infamous previously considered suggestions part of the website, Mojang did flat out deny these. Hostile mobs need to be fantasy creatures, so no realistic sharks or alligators or crocodiles for that matter. And even though the website's now been archived, meaning that a lot of this is up for discussion again, I don't know if this part's gonna change. More of an environmental argument than a game design one. Whenever you build a nether portal, there's a chance that a zombified piglin can spawn next to it. It's the whole mechanism behind gold farms. But an original idea that Notch floated was that we could have seen gas spawning next to our nether portals instead, which, considering that when he said this, our nether portals were all stuck to this size, wouldn't have made a lot of sense. But I think as punishment for our hubris in building such a big portal, it could be fun. At least that's what I say right up until my base gets blown up with one. So you know what? Maybe it's better that we didn't get this way. If you add meat to a stick and a crafting table, you get nothing. But if user Gothic Waffle had gotten their way, we might have seen it become monster bait. It was a feature that Notch said sounded like a good idea, but since this tweet in 2010, we've never gotten any official monster bait added to the game, with one notable exception. Since now if we place down turtle eggs, those are so effective in getting our zombified piglins and zombies to go over and stomp, literal farms have been built around the mechanic, which it's funny that they found the one way to replace a feature with something less humane. Under certain conditions, the original idea for mossy cobblestone was that if you placed it next to water, it could actually spread throughout different blocks. It wasn't just a one and done with the world generation, but something that could actually start to creep into other cobblestone nearby. But eventually the idea was scrapped because Notch wanted to keep them rare and interesting. interesting. And now, anytime that you find mossy stone inside of your world, it at least means you're finding something cool, or an old growth taiga. Volcanoes have been a common feature that fans have requested for years, and at one point it seems like it might have been an idea for the in development phase. On this post stating that in-dev's been updated with a bunch of goodies, Notch specifically mentions to check out your inventory for a volcano block, a new lava spawner that allowed lava to work like water. But as much as fans would want volcanoes after the fact, we never got anything added like this to the overworld. Still, the closest that I've ever seen is a ruined nether portal generated on top of a mountain, which I like a lot more than the basalt deltas, but that's not saying much. As Minecraft grew through its early development, so did the original plan. And it was in this interview with Gama Sutra where Notch talked about the idea to add in different features that he hadn't originally planned for, such as nighttime, infinite maps, and also seasons, which would then come up again with another thing mentioned by Rock Paper Shotgun. But instead of getting this global cycle, eventually we instead got permanent temperature-based biomes in the first Halloween update of Alpha 1.2.0. Though that wasn't the end of seasons, since Dinnerbone would still mention back in Minecon of 2013 the idea of having 500-day years with differing lengths to the day-night cycle, longer in the summer, shorter in the winter, which again was mentioned and never added. Minecraft maps are useful until you go underground, which is an issue that Notch has been aware of since back in 2011, even talking with a fan about the idea of maybe adding in cave maps. It's something that Minimap mods have had this whole time, but even with Notch agreeing with the idea, we never got it into the game. It's a shame too, caves and cliffs would have made a real case for having these cave maps, and so instead, the best use for our maps has always been map art. I'll stick to coordinates for finding my way home. And pay close attention to the Y level, since during development, Notch had even had the idea to raise it up to 512, a big increase from the original 255. And while fans were super excited about getting this much height to play around with in the world, it's in the very tweet where he showed off this screenshot that it was obvious we weren't getting this into the game. Even when later developers would pick back up this task, toying around with the idea of infinite world height, the best we'd eventually get was raising it up to 319 in the Caves and Cliffs update. And also in the Caves and Cliffs, we got our closest substitution for Notch's original idea of spike blocks. Planned all the way back in beta 1.7, the idea here was that these spikes could extend and retract, giving us spike pistons. But instead we got sticky pistons, and we never got anything of the sort added in for our traps. Even our dripstones don't work with pistons, so we've never had this close to the game. Do you ever wonder why it's called a flint and steel? Sure, it uses flint, it uses steel, but a fire striker is also a name for this tool, and we've never had steel in the game, though that wasn't always the idea. Look at this post where Notch first mentions coal ore, specifically mentioning it with the fact that you could add it together with iron ore to make steel, where he later doubled down on this in a post called My Vision for Survival, where the basic versions of swords and armor require iron, and more advanced stuff would require steel, again made with iron and coal. And the closest thing we ever got to an alloy added in Minecraft would be the netherite ingots that we got. But don't worry, there's plenty of steel that exists in Minecraft mods. We weren't exactly hurting for it. The first slabs ever added in Minecraft were dirt slabs. Dating all the way back to the survival test, they didn't even grow grass on top, instead just giving us a half step of dirt. But when they caused terrain generation issues, they were eventually scrapped, which I fear is part of the reason why we got auto jump added to the game, which is a real horror show. And unlike a lot of the features on this list, these were actually added into the game's code. They were just scrapped after they were pulled back. But now with wool slabs, we can at least make a good enough looking comparison, all without auto jump. Huh? When I say toodle-doo, what do you think? No, you're not having a stroke. It's actually the old to-do list application that Notch used to use, like an older version of Trello. And on this, we can see Notch's original idea of adding in gravity to all different blocks, except for obsidian. But while fans kept asking about the idea, it was later in a tweet that Notch confirmed that he stopped liking it. And as such, we never got gravity added to any of these other blocks. Which, speaking to someone who's played with the mods that add these features in, we're better for it. Have you ever tried to make double doors that open up with redstone? It's annoying. I wouldn't recommend it. And apparently, Notch wouldn't either, since when a fan asked Notch about the idea of making double doors easier to control with redstone so that you could only power one of the doors and both of them would open and close, he said, quote, "I'm not happy with it, but I ran out of data for the doors." End quote. So what does that actually mean, to run out of data for the doors? Well, back in the early Minecraft phases, every block had a 4-bit metadata field, meaning you could store a value from 0 to 15. And since the blocks had to store whether it was the top or bottom half of the door, whether it was open or closed, and also its facing direction, taking up 2 bits. That means 2 to the 4 in math, 16 total possibilities, and all 4 bits were fully consumed. Meaning we couldn't actually make a full double door set coded in with just one thing of redstone. And even after the block ID rewrite was eventually solved, the doors were never revisited. While Notch was planning to add in the villages, he'd also toyed with the idea of adding unique items into the village chest pool, giving us even more of a reason to go and search these out. And while this did start out largely true, nowadays the reality is that village chests pull from the same loot pool as everywhere anywhere else. Emerald, iron, obsidian, all of these are things that we can get from other chests. And instead, the exclusive loot that would give us a reason for coming here would be more trading with the villagers instead. And I think that speaks to a critical redesign, because while early villagers were meant for us to raid, nowadays villagers are something for us to protect from raiders, and instead work along with. And we did get structure exclusive items, it was just more with armor trims and heavy cores than anything like this. Also on Notch's to-do list was the concept of adding in land claim flags. It's no secret, PvP and factions are common game modes for Minecraft, so the idea of having one of these features to place down a flag and claim that as your land was an interesting one. And then in survival mode, it could even cost gold to place this down, preventing any mobs from spawning there. And while we did later get banners that we could place down, they have no significance like this. Even the myth of placing down one of the voluntary exile banners from Pillager Raid has no effect on what actually happens to the villager base. If you want to stop monsters from spawning, just place down a torch. Painterly was one of the early famous Minecraft texture packs, so much so that it caught Notch's attention. And in an interview, he talked about the idea of meeting with Rodox to see if they could add something that allows you to pick the kind of texture that you want to use. That was really one of the features that set apart Painterly. There was an online customizer where you could choose alternate versions of textures that you wanted to see in game. But it all seemed to fall apart when Rodox made a statement that said, quote, "It's probably unlikely now that he appears to be hiring exclusively from Swedish folk." And I'm gonna bump that up to definitely unlikely because we never got it. Instead, kind of the opposite. The only other textures that were ever bundled in with Minecraft as an alternative is the programmer art texture packs from before the 1.14 texture update. And there's definitely no picking or choosing. If you want to do that, you have to build your own pack. But a new texture pack might have aligned with Notch's ideas to make the game more grandiose. When asked by user The Big B on Twitter, "Hey, will there be a storyline? Will there be quests?" Notch replied directly, "Yes to all questions." Which I know we're talking about the story and quest part, but it'd be hard for me to mention this and not point out, is it true Minecraft made you a millionaire, as one of the questions? Because now, that's false. Made him a billionaire. While Notch was definitely inspired by RPG elements and how he made Minecraft, the story part didn't seem to last much longer than this idea. Instead, keeping Minecraft as the make your own story game and having different spin-offs like story mode and dungeons for the proper actual storyline. Skill trees were another RPG feature that were planned for the game. When experience points were added in the adventure update for beta 1.8, they're supposedly shown off at PAX Prime with the idea that you could spend these on skill points to level up. And attack and defense stats were early parts of the GUI that we saw in the inventory screen. But instead, all the game's progression was centered around other things that you could get with the equipment, nothing inherent to the player. So while potion effects and enchantments sure seem like things from the RPG skill tree, there's nothing that stops a player who's been playing for 100 hours or someone who's been playing for 0 from getting to the same point if they open up the right chest. Frankly, this shocked me to read. But did you know that for a time, the official stance on mods was that they were in a gray area legally and Notch frowned upon them? I wouldn't have believed it either, but here's the quote, dating back to an old Tumblr post called "An update is coming tomorrow." Now granted, even though Notch did say this, he did also clarify that a lot of the mods bring in really cool features. And so it was highly likely that something like the bridge mod will make it into the game, which though hard to find nowadays, as best as I can tell, this added in a specific block that would add a bridge over gaps, meaning the best way to speed bridge is to have someone else do it for you. And while this never came to the game, we did thankfully get a change of tune when we got ourselves proper mods added into Minecraft. Just the next year, they added in the piston mod with the help from the original piston mod maker. Horses for Mo creatures. The Aether dev works on Minecraft now. Thankfully, that wasn't just how it was supposed to be forever. One of the most controversial features that Notch planned for Minecraft was the idea that our torches would burn out. And if you wanted to get one to relight, you'd have to go up with a flint and steel, which was part of the reason why we need to craft the new lanterns. And while this is all meant for the Halloween update at the time, it was eventually delayed, and then when the backlash was so massive, it was officially canceled at Minecon. And thankfully, we did actually get lanterns into the game, but it didn't mean that our torches had to get any worse. It makes sense that if you want people on your side, you should probably just give them something new and not take away what they already had. Notch also tried to change our torches with the idea of making them flicker. As seen from this forum post, the idea was to add in mega beast creatures that would be a night of absolute horror. That's the real quote, absolute horror. Which nowadays, Minecraft and horror show up anytime that you need to go watch something in your inbox. But back then, it would have been a huge shift to the game. Although, in fairness, we did eventually get the darkness effect that would pulse in when you fought the warden, which is definitely a mega beast, and it also makes the torches flicker when it gets to them. Though no giant red eye appearing on the moon, which I think would have made a lot more people play peaceful mode, which is also why they never added in Herobrine officially. While it was an early creepypasta that Notch played along with, it never seemed likely it was actually going to come to the game, with Dinnerbone eventually slamming the door fully on August 22nd of 2012, saying we have no plans at all to add Herobrine. I doubt this will ever change. But even though that was shot down, the removed Herobrine changelog has shown up in nearly every major update since beta 1.66. But an actual promise that Notch broke was the idea of adding in other kinds of dragons, saying on Twitter, after release, I will totally work on slightly less dangerous dragons that don't destroy terrain and they can land and whatnot. They will be red. And if you think that's not a promise, then Jeb disagrees with you. Since in an AMA on Reddit, Jeb said, well, since Notch more or less promised red dragons, I think I need to add them. I'm just not sure how yet. Only for Dinnerbone to disagree, saying it was never promised and we have no plans to add a red dragon at this time, which only got more confusing when a few months later he said, I'm sure one day there will be, but not right now though. And the final nail in the coffin seems to be from Jeb talking about it this year. When he was asked if anyone at Mojang still seriously discussed the red dragon, he went on to say, quote, yes, we talk about it from time to time, but usually in the context of the old days when we tweeted a lot, end quote. Which is the same reason why I don't think we're getting tameable dragons from the dragon egg anytime soon. Why does the Ender Dragon drop an egg? Probably something we've all wondered from time to time, so what's the actual story? Well, right before Minecraft's official release in 1.0, Notch tweeted out in October of 2011, Notch tweeted out that there isn't a lot of interesting Minecraft news these days because of the feature freeze, so I'll just say one thing, egg. It's that feature freeze that I don't think we talk about very often. They had a specific deadline that they wanted to release Minecraft 1.0. Minecon was happening that year at the Mandalay Bay Casino, they couldn't exactly move it. So the big reason that we got this trophy that never does anything in the game is because the features got frozen so that they could hit that deadline. With all they talked about with the red dragon, it seems like there might have been an idea to have more happening here. But an idea is definitely not a promise, and a promise is definitely not a changelog, so we've never gotten anything like that. And even though Notch originally wanted to scale up the Ender Dragon, that ended up never happening. Even with the scale attribute command that we have nowadays, the Ender Dragon's one of the few entities that it doesn't work on. Minecraft's clouds are boring, which is unfortunate because this idea from Notch might have been a lot cooler. Back during the 2010 Q&A at Minecraft Con, Notch suggested that he might have turned these into physical entities. But I doubt these blocks would have ever been walkable, since when that was added into the Aether, it wasn't very likely Mojang was going to copy it. So they've just stayed as a rendering layer. But we did get the Creeper Easter egg, at least they're not totally forgotten, unlike the zipline. Not only did Notch want to add in the bridging mod to the game, but when the modder Caveator released this mod for the ziplines, Notch replied on the Reddit post specifically praising it. And what seemed like it laid the groundwork for a potential collab eventually fell apart when later Minecraft updates broke compatibility. Closest thing we ever got to a zipline was this bug that existed in Bedrock Edition, which is also broken by future updates. I guess some things never change, including that the community's always wanted minecarts to be a bit better. Even dating back to 2010, fans were asking about connecting minecarts together. And while we did eventually get minecarts linking together to follow behind a furnace minecart, it's hard to call that a proper solution. I mean, furnace minecarts are so broken, they're not even added to all versions of Minecraft. Even Mojang knows they're hard to justify. And while we can leash our boats in newer updates, our minecarts are still excluded from this. But our boats still lost a big feature, since at one point we were going to be able to have movable block entities that could be in a 16 by 16 space. Think of it, a whole chunk moving for a boat. And it wasn't just for the water, this was also the mechanism that would have allowed for elevators. It sounds like the Create mod over a decade before we got it. And we'd have to wait that time for creator Valkyrien Skies, because this never came to Minecraft. Minecraft's not realistic. How else would they make a girlfriend mod? But a realism mode was something that was discussed back in the early days of the game. I'm actually shocked how often Notch brought it up. In multiple discussions with the community, Notch brought up the idea of having a realism slider to the game, with creative mode being one end of the spectrum and full realism all the way over on the other. And while we would eventually get hunger and breath bars and stuff like that, thankfully things like weight limits never came to the game. Otherwise my hungry ass would never be able to play it. And while we never got a realism slider added to the game, we would eventually get game rules and data packs that allow us to basically do the same. Thankfully, we realized that Minecraft was never about realism, but having the options to turn that on, that is what the game's about. PvP is huge in Minecraft, but mostly in fan-made modes. However, there was one idea for Capture the Flag to become an official game mode. In this, everyone would have had their own fortress, and you would have had to go over and steal the flag from someone else's base. The closest thing we ever got to this on pre-made servers was the stuff that we could download for Realms. But it makes me wonder what the entire PvP landscape would have looked like if it was handled first party as opposed to all the third-party devs. Would Hypixel exist? Would Hytale exist? I don't know, but it's fun to think about.
And with that, folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video, so see if they're right and have a good one, all right?